Oits was a big deal. It was the place to be to get your hair cut.
Okay.
I got my hair cut a time or two in there. Not much.
Did you know what this was? Where we're staying?
I cannot remember. I cannot remember. This right here was the two buildings on the right, or the building on the right, I think was Dr. Martin's office. And I've been up there several times.
What type doctor was he? So in one of these buildings right here in front of us?
I'm going to say it's just this side of the bronze awning.
Okay.
And then I want to think this was the whiskey store right here. I'm not sure. Do you want a little story?
Sure.
One day I was, I wanted to iron my blue jeans to go to school for some reason. I can't imagine why. But I got the mother of iron out, and I was ironing them, and I brushed it by my leg and just burned them.
You did? Wow.
Oh, okay. It was bad, a bad burn. Well,
they didn't have aloe vera back then, did they?
No, they didn't. I didn't tell my mother either, but she saw the weeping on my blue jeans.
Wow, okay.
He brought me up here, and he treated it with sulfur-thiazole crystals. I'll never forget that.
Okay.
That's what they used in the war, in World War II.
Okay, interesting.
But when it came time to check the bandage 2 days later, he put me on that table, and he just ripped it off.
Wow, so Dr. Martin did that.
Dr. Martin, he was tough. He was a great doctor, but he didn't, a little pain, he figured you could stand there.
And so what years would that have been, in the 50s, 60s?
Yeah, no, that would have been in the late 50s.
Okay. And then Byron Fain had something in here, didn't he?
Certainly did.
Okay.
You know, the chronology of it is I'm off on because, things would come and go, but Byron Fain did have a TV repair place here, and I interacted with Byron very well after I got back from Auburn. You know, Bill Holly was a year old. He's a third cousin of ours, and he will be your fourth cousin.
And how would he be related to us?
His mother and Dee Dee and my mother were first cousins.
Interesting. Okay.
She was one of the Solomon girls and married. Dr. Holly was not a doctor, you know. He was a pharmacist.
Okay.
Everybody just called him Doc.
I see.
Doc. That's what they did back then.
And I guess his son was the one who ran the pharmacy in the 80s or 70s and 80s. I knew him, and then his son was Will Holly, who was a classmate.
Okay,
Right.
I remember that.
I had no idea that I was related to Will. I wish I had known that back in the day.
Well, I'm the same way.
Okay.
I'm the same way with some of my cousins on the Brannon side.
I got you. So where that awning is, do you remember what that was?
You know, that may, I'm not 100% sure, but I know there was a barber supply store here owned by the Vickers, who Byron Fain was related to.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it was his wife or his mother was a Vickers. I'm not sure. But they had, they sold hair tonic and stuff like that. Two barbers. It was a bigger deal, but you could walk in, it was retail also.
I got you.
So they moved from here over to the other side of the square.
Nice.
About the time I got back from Auburn.
Okay. What year did you get back from Auburn?
70. I want to think this is the telephone company. Let's see.
Oh, that's right.
Right there.
Okay, yes.
I've been up there. Now that was interesting. It really made an impression on me when I was little. I could see, I think there's Bertha Brown and maybe a Varner, let's see, what's her name? Garner lady were two of the switchboard people.
Okay.
And they would, they had a little headset or a microphone they'd speak into, and you would say, if you picked up your phone, you would say, 29 please, and she'd reach up there and plug in 29 from where you were.
Interesting.
That's, in my lifetime, how things have changed.
And the telegraph department or place was right there on the bottom right, correct?
I think that's right. And see, that was way before my time.
Okay.
But I think that's where our Aunt Sidiva, she was working there.
Sidiva worked down here then, and that, and not up. Okay, interesting.
Ended up marrying the guy from Waycross, the train conductor from Waycross.
That's right.
I think that was Grandmother Van's oldest sister.
That is correct, I believe.
And Notorious Inc. there was
We can walk on
Solomon
down.
Hardware.
That was Solomon Hardware, okay.
I worked for your granddaddy as a bag boy. Sam Weeks and I were the bag boys. Ellen Carr, and her husband had died at the time. Ellen was the head. She was the manager. And Bill Carr's wife. Bill Carr worked in the meat market. and so did Miss Janelle, Bill's wife. That's Ken Carr's and Sandra Carr's and Faye Carr's parents.
Okay.
But I worked there, and I'd walk right around here. They had a bunch of guns right on the right-hand side as you walk in the door.
On the right side of Solomon Hardware, you mean?
Right side of Solomon Hardware. When I wasn't working, I'd go in there and look at those guns.
Interesting.
They had a little 22 rifle, a Browning 22 that I thought was the prettiest, neatest little rifle, but it was so expensive we didn't even have a chance to. I didn't have a chance to buy it. I guess
you were window shopping back then.
I guess truly. You're exactly right.
But so Ralph Solomon had this for many. At one time, I saw a photo. It was S.B. Solomon Hardware. Do you remember that name? And maybe became fully Solomon Hardware after that, or okay?
I don't remember. I really don't. It was
because there's a photo of him, and he's inside the store with Nadine Redding, also inside.
I'll be darned.
How about that? We can walk on down. So you worked at the S.B.'s store over here, okay?
In the market, in the grocery store.
So sort of tell me, like when you walked in, and what was inside, and where it was, the layout of it. There was these two buildings right here with District 37 and this one.
From where the 14 is on the mailbox, that was Jack Bridges.
Oh, it was just to the left?
Jack Bridges had this little, just behind the poles was Jack Bridges' Insurance.
So he never moved down to that place where Headland Insurance Agency is, as far as you know?
I think he did, maybe.
Okay.
I know he did.
Okay, but that's where he got his start, right there.
When I was growing up, this is where his business was. I think after when I was a senior or after I got back from college, I moved down here.
I got you.
Norma Mims was his main stay helper at that time.
And it makes sense that he was over here for a little while because he was teaching and then was with SB Mercantile for a little bit.
Exactly.
Uncle Roby also worked over here for 2 years. After he married Aunt Frances, he resigned from the church and started working for the Mercantile. How about that?
I did not know that. Jack's office didn't go all the way back. This thing would go back, and then in the back of Jack, where Headland Insurance Agency was the meat market. That's where Mr. Bill Carr and Harlan Chew was a guy that worked back there. Phil Griggs.
Oh, okay.
Dr. Phil Griggs worked back there and learned how to cut meat. Bill Carr taught him. Mr. Bill could do most anything. He was a really good talent.
This was sort of farm to table, free range meat back in the day, right?
That's right.
Was there a slaughterhouse in town back then?
There
There
was, yes, sir. They'd slaughter meat over here at Wayne Lay's.
Is that where they would get the meat to sell here?
I'm really not sure.
Okay.
I didn't know anything about that.
All right.
One pretty interesting little story. There was a guy named Henry Gray that worked out, I think he lived out close to the Knowles farm, may have worked on the Knowles farm. But he would bring he didn't have a car. He'd bring his wife to town every Saturday in the back of a wagon, sitting in a chair in the back of the wagon. Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard that before?
No.
He was, he didn't cut his hair off, and he had gray hair, and it was wild-looking gray hair. He scared Aunt Dot to death.
He needed to go to the tonic place down the road.
He needed to go to White Barbershop. But many times he'd come in driving a tractor, pulling that wagon with his wife in the back of it.
And the roads, were they asphalted back then?
They were.
Okay. Paved. So you had the meat department. What else was in this building right here, this side?
Down each side, there was a walkway between the dry goods side in the front and in the back. Uncle Major always used the back.
A connection between, so once you were in there, you can go from the clothing over to the supermarket.
Okay. And back in the back of that building was the office. That's where
behind the other district. Okay, and it remained that way until the late '80s or not into the '90s. That's right.
But just groceries down each side. And listen, when all the hands would come in on Saturday to buy their groceries for the week, we'd sack up groceries, and the black families would want to go and visit and do whatever other business.
Right.
We'd write their names on the paper sacks and set them all along the edge of the.
Right out front, here.
Well, not outside. They were inside the store, but
so it was almost curbside. Almost curbside.
Sure it was.
So it was weekends when you worked? Is that when
weekends?
Okay.
Sometimes in the summer when maybe be on vacation.
Okay.
They'd let me work some. Yeah, it was more.
But Granddad Major was primarily in the bank at that time, correct?
But he stayed over here in this office a good bit, and he'd walk when he'd come in. Listen to this.
Okay.
You're gonna love this. He would come in and get an apple at the store, and he'd start peeling that apple. You ever see him peel an apple?
No.
He never would let it. He never would let it break. He would, with a little pocket knife that he had, pen knife.
Okay.
He'd start peeling that apple, talking to folks, peeling that apple, and that thing would string down to the ground. I'll never forget that.
That's so funny.
It is
But
crazy.
he didn't eat the apple, correct?
He would eat the apple.
Okay. And Lake Mila was put in, or if people needed a permit to go out there, or a little daily fishing license to go out there, would they come here to get that?
You're not sure. I do know that Brother Sam, Uncle Major hired Sam to work out there.
I believe that Bill Van said he worked out there one summer, and also Walter Oates.
Oh,
how interesting is that?
Yeah. Cool.
So.
I bet you they could come to his business and get a permit.
Interesting.
You would think.
So who all worked with you? How many when it was at its peak? Who was in there at different times?
Two in the meat market, and sometimes
the cars. Okay.
The cars were Bill Carr and Phil, and before Phil was Harlan too. Mr. Gary Jones. That's Foy Jones' brother, I believe. Mary Louise doesn't think so, but I'm almost sure that he was the brother to Foy Jones, who had the two boys, Charles and Philip.
Okay.
Charles and Philip. Donna Cruz is with Charles now. Anyway, he worked back there some. That's two. The two cars, that's two back there. The two lady cars is 4, 5, 6 on Saturdays. Two bag boys that didn't get paid very much.
Okay.
And probably didn't do a whole lot.
And what about Marilyn and Mila and Dad? They've worked in there a little bit too.
They were
after. And the other, okay.
And many people worked in there. Sam Brannon worked there. Don McClendon worked there.
You saw Waddy some in there, right? In the back. Waddy was where was he primarily?
He was in the dry goods side.
And that's where he sold his toys. He had a little toy section, I think. And maybe before you started working. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Well, that's quite fascinating. So at least more than 10 at any time. Certainly combining the two, there were more than 10. Okay.
Yeah. I only think there were 3 people working over there, and I can't even remember. Cloteen probably worked there. I cannot. Mr. Peel. Mr. Peel was the main manager.
Okay, interesting.
You know, you've heard the stories about the copper kettle. I'm going to give you a little more risque story.
All right, let's hear it. Let's get out of over on this side right here. Okay.
Hey, this was what everybody called the Greasy Spoon. They served great food, but it was greasy and, not healthy at all. But the story that I've heard many times, I didn't see it, but Miss Althea Platt dipped snuff. But she was dipping one day, and she had a can over behind the griddle where they were frying hamburgers. That's the way they do it.
That became a topping that day on someone's burger?
Spit, and it spattered on some of the spittle spattered on the grill. Okay. Well, I'm not saying there was anything on it then, and it burned it off. But her husband, I can't remember his name right this minute. He said, "I got out there, quit that." God, that's English. That's English or Scottish
Old English,
talk.
Scottish talk. Okay.
There you go.
Interesting.
God, I've heard Tony McCraney say it recently.
Did it have an outdoor area like that on the right, or is it just a small little place with a counter? So they were cooking behind the counter, right? Everyone could see them cooking.
They had it rigged up different. The griddle was on the left-hand side as you walked in the door, and you could sit down. Or maybe the table, maybe they had a few tables on the right.
So it may be fairly deep back in. I haven't been inside, but I guess it could go back at least as far as the other.
I think it goes back to that block wall there with the products on it.
What do you recall in this spot where Headland Insurance Agency is?
You know, several things were there late. I mean, in the 70s. 70s. Joe Smith, Donnie Smith's little brother Joe, had a TV repair thing in here.
Okay, interesting.
I honestly cannot remember what was in there. I should be able to. Well, the motor company, one thing that I do remember about Long Motor Company, when I was really little, Well, you know, we lived over right behind it on Forest Street.
That's right.
And every time I walked to town, I was alluding to this a while ago, I'd walk with my dog following me. I had a dog named Ike. Aunt Edith named the dog.
After Dwight D. Eisenhower.
When Eisenhower won the election, we got the dog about that time.
Okay.
Got it from the Moats family that ran the Joyce Theater. He had Spitz. He was a white dog with brown spots, not solid white. He was a mongrel. But I'd walk behind the building here, and by that door, where the roll-up door is, the far door, that was open. They had it rolled up, and that's where they did all their welding. And I'd walk by there, and Mr. Gene Bostic from Tumleton, Larry Marshall married his daughter. I think they were in Sam's or Wayne's grade. Anyway, they'd be in there welding, and I'd stop and look, and he'd holler out there, "Don't look at that! Don't look at that weld!" But I remember that distinctly, and I'd walk right in behind where the bank is now. You could come in the back of the Village Inn. It had swinging screen doors on it.
Okay, but not upstairs. This is the bottom area.
I just come in right by where the bank is.
Okay.
Come in the door instead of walking around this way. In fact, I think they had a little service station right here.
Okay.
Sometimes I'd walk this way, but most of the times I'd walk in the back door of a going restaurant business.
Which was the Village Inn right here. With the,
we ate there all our lives.
Okay.
I'd walk in with that dog behind me and go right through the kitchen and knock the swinging doors open.
Yes.
And go right into the serving area and right on through the front door and out.
No one said a word.
No, they expected me to come. Is what it seemed like. Now today it wouldn't fly. That kind of stuff wouldn't fly these days.
What is the home right through there that became the Porch House Cafe?
That was the old Halstead house.
Okay.
Judge Halstead and his wife Edna lived there. He had some older children, and Caleb Halstead actually was the closest to our age. I think he was about Wayne's or Sam. I think he was about Sam Brannan's age.
Okay.
But another thing about the Walden Motor Company was that they would bring the new cars in, the ones that were the new model for the year. And I can remember when they put I was in, I'm going to say, junior high school. It's when the Edsel came out. Whenever that came out, they had an Edsel sitting in there.
Okay. Interesting.
That was the one that was a complete flop.
Now, explain the service station that Mark Willis said this was connected to Walden Motor. Is that just where people would gas up their cars after buying a new one or something right over here?
I think
you recall?
It was people used it, bought gas there.
Okay. His mother told him that. He said he listened to her all of his life, which is a good thing.
Yeah. And I'm sure they did. They had whenever they get a car, they could fill it up with their own gas. And then the general public would go and buy gas.
And right through there, on the right, just the first home past the Walden Motor Company is Jack and Mabel Bridges' home.
Yes.
And across the road from it, directly across where the Southeast Alabama Gas Company is where Granddad Major, his first wife, and Waddy lived until they moved down to the home on Main, way down there.
I got you. Also, after that, years after that, the Murphys, the Murphy lady that wrote for the paper, she lived there, and they had a son named Mike. Mike Murphy was about Wayne's or Sam's age.
Okay.
I bought chemicals and fertilizer from Espy's when I was farming. I farmed for 9 years.
And you'd buy them over here or go to the fertilizer plant? They would bring them here from the plant, I guess.
You're right. You come in here and tell them you want some fertilizer, and they send you down there to pick it up at the fertilizer plant. But a lot of chemicals when I was farming, I bought out of there. In fact, I bought a gallon jug of 2,4,5-T, which is Agent Orange.
Oh, that's what they sprayed in Vietnam,
That's what they sprayed in Vietnam, and it's certainly not good for your health.
No.
Bad.
Parking lot, and this was a gas station, but below, based on M. Solomon's record, there's 20 feet of oyster shells in that parking lot where John Jolly and the Bragg Oaks Sr. and other people would come and they'd eat oysters here on the square on the weekends. You know, John Jolly died in an accident coming back from in Lynn Haven, coming back from there with oysters in the car.
back behind the bank, I think also is where they shucked oysters in 2 or 3 different places and didn't haul them away. And if you've ever been to Hunt's and go in the oyster door during oyster season, the smell is not good. They take them, they put them in fill-in holes just like they did here. This was sort of a swampy, low place, according to Daddy.
Okay.
And they shook the. I want to think he told me that they sold the oysters for a nickel a dozen.
Interesting.
A nickel a dozen.
And where would they get them? At places like Ed's and Dothan?
Go to Florida and haul them back. They'd go in a wagon and have to ice them down, insulate them, and haul them back on a wagon. In the early times, when they were putting the oyster shells here,
okay,
they were hauling them in on wagons.
Now, if you remember when we were with Uncle Jim the other day, he was explaining that there was a little oyster bar down in this area along this stretch. Do you remember that?
Right here.
Yes.
My daddy's told me about it. When he worked for, I think when my oldest brother Wayne was born, he was working as a bag boy at the Tip Top Grocery that Mr. Bill Lumpkin owned. And they came and got him and said, "You need to go. You're fixing to have a child." And he left to go when Wayne was born. And maybe they came and told him he already had one. But he would tell me that when he'd be sweeping at night, it'd be like 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night. Almost, I think we closed at 9. And the other grocery stores around did too. Rusty Davis worked down here at the Jitney Jungle. And we'd get through working, we'd get together and take off to the late show in the Martin Theater in Dothan.
In Dothan, okay.
This service station was a Standard Oil service station, and as I understand, they had a plaque. There were big stucco columns. It was a stucco building. You probably remember. Anyway, there was a piece of marble engraved with the names of the owner, and I believe to my soul it said T.B. Woods. Now that's my grandmother's brother would have built that building.
Interesting.
T.B. Woods is Thomas Woods, who was the urologist, OBGYN guy in Dothan. Delivered me.
Wow, okay. And that service station later became Hardy's Headland Tire back before they moved to the 4-lane.
Exactly right.
Okay.
I would come up here, if I had a flat tire on Sunday after they closed, I'd come up here and fix my tire and then straighten up with them.
Later, right? That's what everyone did, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, not everyone did that. In fact, I helped. I didn't know that much about tires. I couldn't even operate the changer.
Okay.
But I'd air my tire up or put a patch in a bicycle tire or something. But several times I'd be here and somebody would come by, and I'm talking about people coming down 431. The 4-lane wasn't there.
okay.
They'd come right through here and see me out there fooling around with a tire company and think I was working on Sunday, and I aired up some tires.
That's nice. Did you get any tips that way?
I would take you.
What do you remember about the square? What sorts of activities were going on here in the 50s and 60s? There were steer shows on the other side on occasion.
I mean, I was in a couple of them. They did. They would close that street off, and we'd tie our cows. I think they'd put up a fence or post here along the
on that other side.
Here on the other side.
Okay.
And we could tie our cows out there.
When did Harvest Day begin? Was that something like the 70s?
Yeah, I'm going to say early 70s.
Okay.
Just guessing, mid to early 70s, I would
got
say.
you. But was this always, were there always a lot of trees? And these are old trees, but did kids come in here and play football and do different things?
All kind of stuff
picnic,
going
maybe? Okay.
The main thing I remember about it growing up was people would have rummage sales. You know, like they do now, different parking lot areas. This is where they do it. They'd hang their clothes out here on racks, I guess.
That was what Jim McGee was telling me yesterday. I met Jim and Gordon over here, and they told me the exact same thing.
They had, anytime political people came in to do a rally, they usually do it under these trees.
Interesting. Okay.
I can remember George Wallace coming.
Now, do you remember when Waddy ran for state senate in '58?
I do.
Did he speak out here? Would he?
I heard him speak in front of the dry goods store.
You did? Wow, interesting.
He was just talking to people. Waddy had a gift for that.
He did. But you
I'm sure that he did out here, but I didn't.
Okay. But you met George Wallace when he was running for governor?
Yes, sir.
Interesting. And then he was a 4-time governor, right? 3 or 4-time governor.
That's right.
And I'm sure you saw him a few times after that when he was running for re-election.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You saw that little article. He spoke out at Lake Espy with Waddy. Waddy introduced him. This was when he was the judge, and they were both running for delegate to the convention, and they both were there, served together. How about that?
Headland played Clive when Wayne was a senior, I believe, and we were leaving. I think they beat us. I think they whipped Headland pretty good.
That's in Barber County, right?
Yeah, that was when Jerry Beasley was playing. I think played for Clive, but when we were leaving, we were on we rode with Uncle Sam. Daddy and I rode with Uncle Sam and Uncle Jim probably, and maybe Jackie. I don't remember who was there. But as we were driving out, Uncle Sam said, "Look at there, there's George Wallace." He was walking away from the game. As we were leaving.
Just by himself?
By himself.
And this is before he became governor, obviously?
Before he became governor, yes, sir.
Okay, interesting. How many governors have come out of Barber County? At least 4, wouldn't you say?
I'm sure. I wanted to think Hospital Hidden was here, but Jim says not. Or maybe he said it was here, and then they moved it.
You mean the oyster bar?
No, Hospital Hidden.
I got you. I'm sorry. Yeah.
When we were building houses, Daddy built houses, and I did for 2 or 3 years after I got out of Auburn. But we'd close our loans out here. They would handle the loan closings for us. And it may be in this building, but one of these buildings, and it may be that Halstead and Whidden were here, or Halstead was here. And there was a building, it could be that black and white building. I cannot remember. What I do remember, and it could very well be this where all the fall stuff is, Groove Nutrition.
And this is, okay.
See those seals, window sills, big wood?
Yes.
People would come up here and apparently just loiter around. That was a good seat. And they drove nails up in there and clipped the ends of it off with snippers where there'd be sharp points there to discourage people from loitering right around the door of that business.
That's one way to do it.
And if it's not, one of those, I'm not sure which one, I don't believe it was this end. And I want to think that may be where the Tip Top Grocery was that Mr. Bill Lumpkin ran, that Daddy worked at.
The greenish building on the left or one in the middle? The one
in the middle.
And that then later became Curtis West?
In one of
his
them,
shop,
I
okay.
honestly cannot remember. I do remember Mr. Woodrow Grantham worked in Charlie Carr owned that Gypsy Jungle, and Wayne Carr worked in the meat market along with Billy Lingo.
I got you. I remember that name.
Yeah.
Now this was a stables you're telling me? Okay.
And they redid the sidewalks. The reason I know it was a stable is because it tapered off, the sidewalk tapered off to the street. And they had... so
it was a wooden stable, not like this, not a brick facade like this.
I think it was brick.
Was it?
I think
okay.
It was brick. In the big area there where they've got the door and the window was probably an entrance, like a double door.
I got you.
To get the mules in and out. See the difference in the curbing right here, right about where, even with me, over a little, looks like newer curbing.
I see, yeah.
And I think they've taken that out, they've knocked all the old cement out and made it flat for all the sidewalk.
So it was sort of, okay.
It was slanted to let the mules walk up, plus they had cut grooves in it. Griffin had a mule stable, the Griffin family.
Okay, later they had the gin with Major Griffin.
I think it was, well, I know it was S.P. Griffin gin, but I think it was just the Griffin's Mule Barn. I don't know which was which. See, that was so far ahead of my time.
Okay.
But people would be sitting out here, old men.
Okay.
I think I can remember Mr. Alto and Jess Johnson sitting out in front of these two stables, whittling. Nobody whittles anymore.
Now, what is that exactly?
It's just taking a piece of wood and sharpening it off.
There's a little wood carving, kind of.
It was like wood carving, but they didn't ever do.
So it was Granddad Major's apple peeling, at a level up from that, maybe. Exactly. Although he was pretty talented, right?
That's right.
Interesting.
They spit tobacco juice and just old timers with it. passing the time away.
I got you.
Stories.
Well, and today we'd be on our phones, right?
That's
Smartphone.
exactly right. Tapping on these phones. If I'm not mistaken, where I'm almost 100% sure that later on that was Headland Auto Parts. Headland Auto Parts when I was growing up.
The building on the right, number 22. Okay.
Right. That goes all the way to the back, and it's got the big work area in the back where they work on these motorcycles.
Interesting. Okay.
Headland Auto Parts. That was Odell Bain and David Thomas.
And Odell actually got his start based on what I've read from A.D. Walden.
That's
Worked over
exactly
there.
right.
And then, interesting.
In the parts department. There.
And Odell would be Darren Bain, who was my classmate, his grandfather,
That's
I
right.
believe. Okay.
His
Ken, and who's the other son? Rod.
Roger married my cousin
Lynn. Interesting.
Ken through the Woodses, through the
Gotcha.
Woods family. And what? Oh, I think maybe this one. I cannot remember. One of them was Harvey Palmer's textile store,
Like a fabric store. So it
fabric
sort of
store.
still has that same look to it as a quilt shop.
Yeah, it does. It does. But because of these doors, that looks like the...
Oh, and later became the dollar store downtown back in the 80s or something like that. Bill's Dollar Store. So this was like a Ben Franklin store or something like that.
They called it Christo's Five and Dime. It was just knick-knack stuff, little trinket kind
It's
of
interesting
stuff.
how these businesses sort of stay consistent over the
It
years.
is.
Fabric store and this. Yeah. So that was it.
I'll tell you another little story about Don McClendon's daddy. Don's daddy and his mother had this jewelry store.
Right.
And a fella that I don't know that he owned the Christo's line, but he may have. The guy's name was Alvin Walsingham.
Mm-hmm.
That's you'll catch in just a second.
Okay.
He and Carl were big buddies. The acquaintances, I'll say, and they got to be good friends. And I was, Carl had a bunch of rabbit dogs, and I got interested in that. We'd go out at night and run rabbits like they used to run fox.
Okay.
Electric fences and...
So rabbit hunting was done at nighttime?
We treat it just like an old fox hunt. Now,
Okay.
the old timers like Tom Baxter and P.O. Creel and that crowd would go and turn their fox dogs out, and they may run fox for 10 miles. They'd go follow them where they could hear the dogs and know where they were.
Okay.
Well, Carl did the same thing with his rabbit dogs, and he had some really good rabbit dogs that they were bigger beagles. They didn't do that little field trial, sniffing along.
So your dog Ike wouldn't have been a good one.
Ike was not a beagle. He was not a rabbit dog prospect.
All right.
Carl had them. He had some good ones.
Okay.
And the Walsingham guy in Panama City, he had left here and went to Panama City, and they still stayed in touch. But they talked rabbit dogs. They used it for deer down there in Panama City. Turns out that this Walsingham fellow that Carl McClendon knew was named Alvin Walsingham. Have you ever heard of Alvin's Island?
Yes. Okay.
That's the same guy.
Same person.
Blew me away.
Interesting. That's a great story. Alvin's Island.
Yep.
Panama City.
Alvin Walsingham.
It seems like that was built in the 70s, early 80s. I remember as a kid going there often. Yeah.
Everybody wanted to go there. Bathing suit, sunglasses.
Remind me, what burned down right
I
here?
believe that's the Jitney Jungle.
Okay.
I'm almost 100% sure.
So beautiful trees have grown in there.
Yeah, those are popcorn trees actually. And they're cool trees, but they're invasive. There'll be popcorn trees coming up everywhere from them.
And how quickly can they grow into that size?
Well,
a decade?
Yeah, or more.
Okay.
Those are probably right after the fire. They probably came up.
When do you think the fire, when was that, back in the 90s or 80s?
I'm going to say it was the 90s.
Interesting.
90s. A family that came in with the steel. I'm ashamed that I can't call the guy's name. I saw him in Dothan the other day. His wife's name's Sandy, had a bunch of girls. He bought it after the the smelting plant out there. Whatever
They came down from Pennsylvania?
Came from Pennsylvania.
Brass something.
American Brass.
That's right.
That's who he worked
That's right.
for. I kept saying steel. But he's the one that opened that hardware store up and did very well with it. He was a very...
And it was the hardware store that burned then. Is that what you're saying?
Store
okay.
Right. But getting young ones. Charlie Carr's getting young ones. All right, the next building I'm completely familiar with, that was Car Electric Supply Company. That was the business that Mr. Sam Carr owned. And when my daddy left, he left Solomon Motor Company. He and Uncle Sam worked at Solomon Motor Company.
Okay.
Uncle Sam had already left and started working with the bank. Thereafter, I don't know dates, thereafter he went in business, bought a little share of the business, and went in with Mr. Sam Carr, and they did. That's where I spent most of my growing up life.
Okay, and what was it? What kind of business was it again?
Hardware.
It was a hardware, another
Paint,
hardware store. Okay.
Paint, they sold paint, they sold wells, they sold pipe. The pipe threading machine that they used to use here, Mr. Fred Patterson bought it and used it over there in their building.
Interesting. So,
furniture, TVs.
Okay.
Daddy'd tell about people coming and sitting down on Saturday that didn't have a TV and just sitting down in there in one of the chairs watching TV.
I got you. So is this before the drugstore? I'm a little bit. So someone was talking about a drugstore. Is that the?
Next door.
It's maybe in the.
I believe
the third building. So this entire building in front of us right here was the hardware store, and so you're maybe the drugstore is where that white awning is and the white top.
That's exactly what I think. And the next door.
What all did you do when you would visit your dad? What kinds of things?
Didn't have any glasses. I'd take a old broom handle and drive a nail in it from back there in the workbench. There was a black guy that worked for him named King Williams.
That's a name, yeah.
All right. His Mary Ethel, his wife, was a council person for Headland when I was working for the city when Billy was the mayor. He was a good man. I'm telling you, good as they come. But he would he didn't want to particularly, but he'd sort of look after me and keep me out of trouble.
Which is hard to do, I'm sure.
It was hard to do.
So which of the cousins did you sort of hang out with? Who was your age? And Dad was a little bit older,
He was.
correct?
I spent a lot of time with Mark. I did.
Okay.
A lot of time with Mark. But Bill, Van, and I were probably Mile and I were the closest.
Okay, interesting.
But Bill and I did camping and Boy Scouts.
And how'd you get around back then, like together, if you had a camping trip?
Bicycle. Oh, somebody would take us.
Okay.
Usually we didn't do that. Usually I'd either ride my bicycle out to his house, and we would, if we were going to have a camp out, we were into the following your daddy and Waddy too, I guess, and my brothers were in the Boy Scouts.
Before? Okay.
In fact, I inherited all of Mark's Boy Scout stuff.
You did? I need to see that sometime. Yeah.
Oh, I don't have it. Gee,
But he gave it to you.
Yeah.
It's nice. I'd like to look at
couldn't
it.
wear it. I wish I had it.
Oh, you mean back in the day? I thought maybe when he died that you inherited it. I didn't know about this. Interesting.
No, I would
You
be
got
glad
it
to
from.
give it to you.
I got you.
But,
So
we
some
would-
sort of secondhand kind of thing. I guess.
turned it over
Okay.
to somebody else that was doing the same thing.
Interesting.
Sam the Third.
I see. So you recall getting on your bicycle and going down Forest Street to meet up with Bill at his house.
Or to Uncle Major's. We'd go down there and I'd play with Mila and Marilyn and Mark.
Did they sometimes get on bicycles and ride around town with you? Did they do that? Okay.
I don't remember them riding bicycles much. And Mila and Marilyn for sure. I'm sure Mark did. But I would ride on past there to Bill's house if we had a plan. And Danny Johnson might be there. Pat Davis. I don't think he ever went to many of our camp outs, but we camp out on Skinner's Branch or back over there where where the Whites live.
Don was talking about the drugstore that he'd have lunch here from time to time. You remember like sandwiches, and he would go to Ed's on occasion when he was working at White Van, and then he'd come over here. He enjoyed it.
Come over here and get an ice cream.
Is that it? Okay.
What most everybody did. I know Alicia's daddy worked at the hardware store for Patterson, Mr. Patterson. This is in the late 70s and 80s. He'd walk over here and get an ice cream.
What type of ice cream did they have? Was it like a cone ice cream, dip, made here or shipped in from Dothan?
Come
maybe
in from the Supreme Ice Cream plant.
a truck would come through.
I tell you, Pete Bracken worked there. The old fire marshal, the fire chief here was Gail Shelley. Harry, that worked at the bank. Married Roy Shelley.
Okay, another.
Shelley.
Got you.
She worked there when we were growing up.
She did? Okay,
Yes, she
interesting.
did. Oh, look at this. These nails that they've torn out, this thing right here would have gotten driven into an end of a broom handle. And I sharpened that thing off where it'd be good and sharp.
So that's creating weapons, huh?
I'm telling you.
All right. They had to improvise back then.
Everything else to do.
So you've got the train tracks. They were here long before you were born, correct?
Long before. I don't remember the company from Turner Company. They'd already moved to Dothan. They didn't stay here but 1 year.
Okay.
I believe.
What happened? I mean,
They needed to be bigger. They moved
all right.
to a bigger place.
Who took over their building here?
It was the warehouses. Mr. M rented it eventually.
Okay.
I think though he had a business over at the oil mill or whatever he was doing.
Okay.
He did a lot of things.
Okay.
M did. But he did rent that, and that was his office. I've been in the office to see him there before. He had a big mural on the wall. I can't remember. I think it was cotton. I think it was
So it was a cotton warehouse. He used it to store cotton back
They
then?
did.
Okay.
I think they stored all kind of stuff in those, maybe before the time that he rented it for an office building.
Okay.
And it was a shabby looking little thing. It was tin everywhere, some of it rusty. But he
Interesting.
fixed it up where he had a nice office.
So when your dad was over there, you had the drugstore in the middle, and then Kerry Solomon was on the end, right? Was he working here? Do you recall him working here at that time?
I remember Mr.
He died
Carey.
in his 50s, I believe.
Died young, but I remember Mr. Carey. I didn't have an opportunity to go in there much. I guess there was nothing there for me. He was in the insurance business.
Okay.
But where Davis Family Event Center is where Mr. Kutchin's barbershop was.
Oh, I've heard about it.
All right. I'd walk when it was time. Mother would tell me, "Go get your hair cut."
He was a fast barber.
He was fast. He was fast. He had a bad finger too. I don't know if he cut it off. I don't know what happened. Maybe it got jammed when he was little, but he could hold all those scissors, and I'm telling you, within a minute or two, you'd be ready to go outdoors, especially getting a haircut like you got, and like we all got.
And he
then.
used a straight razor to shave, face it, right? People would come in for...
I'd see them getting shaved,
Okay.
wrap that hot towel around and let it just sit there where they could breathe, leave their nose out, and it would soften up those whiskers where he'd take them off. Oh, I can remember him stropping. Took a strap.
Wow, okay. Just sharpen it.
Honing it, yeah.
Was the waiting room as big as the one over at Oit's, or was it just a little bit smaller?
I'd say it's a little smaller, but
Okay.
it went far back.
Okay.
He
So
had
you'd go
2
in and
chairs,
sit. Everyone would go in there and wait.
sit down and wait.
No appointments back then. No
No
setting up.
appointments.
Okay.
You didn't have to wait long for cuts.
Farmers and Merchants Bank was along that side. Kerry Solomon Insurance. Any memories of this area?
Really not.
Okay.
I didn't hang around. I don't know if this is off limits for me, but I don't remember doing much fooling around here. I did in the back. That hardware building had a back door.
Okay.
And if I didn't go around and come this way, I'd come up
Sneak
through-
out the back.
I'd come in the back door.
Was Ike with you?
Ike was with
Always with you.
Always
How many
with-
years did Ike live?
He lived till, listen, I was probably went to Troy when he died. Once I left to go to Troy, we never did see the dog again. I don't know if he got run over or if he was
Do you have any photos of Ike?
A few. Not many.
I'd like to see one.
There's some, and
Okay.
you've got one. You've got one in all of that thing you bought, the thumb drive that you bought.
Okay, I'll look. I'll go through.
White dog with a black. Well, he had a ring around his tail. Black
Okay,
ring
I'll
around
look
his tail.
for it. So that's Ike.
Oh, listen, I used to play in the back when they get a refrigerator in and have the refrigerator boxes would be sitting out back, the cardboard boxes. I'd get out there and play in them. And one day, some guy, I don't even know who it was, came up to me and said, "Son, you need to get out of there. A car is not, you're going to be in there and a car is not going to see you and they could back over you. Don't do that." I was playing right out in the middle of the doggone parking lot.
Do you remember who told you
I
that?
cannot.
So in that lot that's behind, were there some businesses back there that maybe?
Well, back doors
Okay.
of businesses. back doors of the jungle. Back doors
but there weren't some other buildings that got torn down or anything back there. That was just an open lot area.
No,
okay.
Raymond Jackson, I think, redid this building that's here. May have built it new. I don't remember that. I will tell you something that this is sort of a historic kind of thing. It's not sweeping, but it's. You remember? No, you never will remember when the Ford Mustang came out. It was a new deal. It was Ford. They had a sports car. Thunderbird was their sports car, and the Chevrolet had the Corvette. Mm-hmm. Well, Ford came out with another sports car, affordable type sports car, and that was the Mustang. They put it in a warehouse building right over behind where the Woods Standard Oil service station. Somewhere behind that and this way, a little to the north, is a huge metal building.
Way down there.
Way down on the far end. That's where they stored it. And if Morris or Stuart Faulkner would open the door, they carry you and they let you see it before anybody else saw it. And I remember being in there one day, got in. I think Stuart was carrying it to show it to Sporman Knowles Jr. Little Sporman. Sporman bought the car. It was a green, 67 or somewhere. 65.
A new release.
And he was the. He bought it. Sporman was working.
He was the first person to have that car in this town.
The one that I saw.
Okay.
He bought it.
Interesting. And if they still have that around Headland, that'd be great.
I bet you he wishes he does. I haven't seen Sporman Knowles in years. He left here and went to Dothan, and he worked for the gas company, Alabama Gas, to jail. Thank goodness they never did have to put me in there. I probably belonged in there, but
I hear you. Yes. So that was the jail. Okay.
The first thing I can remember about this is that Dr. Jim Frank Jordan, the veterinarian, when he came to Headland, maybe right out of college, I don't know where he came from, that was his office. And he stayed there, and I think he went back to Auburn. I think he had family up there, or his wife had family up there. Arthur Moore, when he came to Headland, that was his veterinary office.
A very small office, right? Or was those buildings just behind it? Would you think that was also part of his clinic?
I think he had cages where that white building is between the tin top. I believe that is where he had. And
I remember it in the late 70s and 80s being a seafood market.
Okay.
You don't remember that? It was a little seafood market, and this was a dry cleaners right here.
Dry cleaners, yeah.
Probably didn't stay open very long as a seafood market, but I remember going inside.
And that was in the 70s or 80s.
And can you explain why this was named the Patterson Alley?
Because Mr. Fred Patterson had a hardware store there.
Maybe on the right-hand side?
On the right-hand side.
Okay.
This building right here, the first building you come to, the 10-sided building, belonged to Earl Solomon. He kept all kind of pecan equipment in there when we were doing pecans.
And he also had a little business behind us over there, a little dry goods place, I believe. Okay.
He did.
Was he another one that did a lot of different things like M and?
He did 2 or 3 things. He got into pecans with us, Dr. Van and I.
Let's walk right up here.
Before that, he had the clothing store. I don't know what all he did before that. Him was more of a businessman. He was
trying to get out of the sun a little bit over here.
State representative.
Oh yes. So you're saying that maybe the brick building right there, that was the hardware store?
That was the hardware store.
And then Earl Solomon owned this warehouse.
He did.
Okay. And what did he put in the warehouse? Do you know?
I remember he had a pecan cleaner and a pecan harvester, and he stored that in there. I'd help him get it in and out. We also sprayed pecans. Mr. Earl and I would get up. I was farming at that time.
Okay.
This was before I started working for the city.
Okay.
And we had a pecan spraying, a big old truck we'd bought from Georgia that had a sprayer on it. Started spraying our pecans, the ones we rented from Grandmother Van out on 22, that pecan orchard. Earl had a big pecan orchard down at Kensey. Then we sprayed for Mr. Henry Pignol. We went to Haleburg. Earl and I were driving that truck. Earl
What was his age? He was probably a good 20 years older, right? Or,
he was much older. He was
so
my parents' age, a little bit younger.
So you were maybe I mean, you were then maybe in your 30s, late 30s, early 40s?
30s, I'd say.
Okay. And Earl's driving you around. Okay.
Well, no, I was driving around. This was a big truck. He would go, he may have driven it some, but it was mechanical, and I was the best man for that job. But we did. I had a ball. I'd do it before work. We'd get up before daylight, go over here to the city and fill it up with 500 gallons of water, mix up the chemicals, and go spray 1 or 2 before work time. Then he'd go, he may have been delivering the mail then. I don't know.
Interesting. So you're saying Uncle Bob Solomon owned this building, okay?
He bought pecans in there. He stored and sold pecans. I don't think he made as many there, probably with land.
And so Earl was his son.
Earl was his son.
Okay.
But Uncle Bob was the epitome of a Southern gentleman. I'm telling you, he was as nice as he could be. And he'd take time with a little towhead kids like me, and he could talk to anybody.
And he lived a long time, didn't he?
He did. He did. He was a good man.
What was his primary business, if you had to name something he did?
Honestly, I think he loaned some money. I think he loaned money to people that couldn't go to the bank and get it.
A little mom and pop?
Something like that.
Okay, like a pawn
Short
shop.
loan,
Yeah, I got you.
not pawn,
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Farm loans, I think he did some of that. He owned a bunch of land.
What was the building to the right? It was a service station as well, correct?
Yeah, this was this building right here, is the best I remember, is the old post office. See that little thing that's boarded up?
You're telling me that this Bob Solomon took over was the original post office?
I think he owned it and leased it to the post office until they bought. They
I see. So it was the pecan thing before. Then he leased it to the city. Okay.
Let's see now. No, it was a pecan after the
post office.
After the post office moved over behind back there in Martha Jewell's, the brick building where it was when you were growing up.
Yes.
Then they moved it on out. Okay. But after it was the post office, this is where my granddaddy would drive that mail truck right between those buildings right there. And if I'm wrong about that, it was between these buildings. Maybe where that is where the old theater was. Believe.
Yeah, sort of the back of the theater. The theater was on the front on that side, but then it was pretty large, right? So you could park in the back maybe for the theater, because 2 different people have told. Uncle Jim said it was up there, and then someone said it was sort of back in this area.
When he was growing up, it was over there.
Okay.
And when I was growing up, it was right here.
And who was it named after, the Joyce Theater? Who owned it?
Know.
Was it a regional chain of theaters?
I think it was.
There was one maybe in Abbeville as well?
The one in Abbeville was named Vance. I believe, I can't remember if the one on the end was Beerus Davis. I think where the glass thing is right here, right in front of the truck. Mm-hmm. I believe that was Beerus Davis's dry goods store. Pat Davis's daddy, Beerus. And honestly, I was focused on the other side of the square.
You said that.
Esprit Mercantile.
And Pat was a friend of Bill's and also yours. I mean, but he's not a relative of ours,
no,
is he? Okay.
He's not.
Just around the same age.
2 sets of Davises, I think. I don't think that they're kin to Rusty. Rusty Davis was another friend, Pat's age.
I got you.
Billy Davis is another one. I don't know that any of those are
interesting.
They may be. But a lot of folks work for him. Teddy Wilson, I remember, worked for Beerus. And I don't know if Don might have. Don McClendon. I know he helped Bunce. I know he worked at Bunce's store. On the end down there, I cannot remember except Howard Parker, I believe, ended up with that as his showroom. The building right by the old depot, the block building, the block warehouse was
and he might have ended up using Earl Solomon's warehouse for his. I think he did. He had things in it. Howard Parker did.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay.
And you know, we were talking about the old jail and the little building in between, where I told you they had cages for the dogs. The next building was Patterson Hardware right here. It's the back door of Patterson, right across from.
So Patterson is this yellow building, correct?
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly.
Okay. So this was the front. We were looking at the back of it on the other side, where he probably parked and entered through the back door.
You could park.
Okay.
A few people could park in the back, but most of them came and went through the front.
And then next to it,
Gee whiz.
that's the Van Dry Goods, the Bottle Tree.
the Bottle
So
Tree
what can you tell me?
Nothing. That was.
We have a
way
lot
before
written
my
down.
time.
Okay. We have a lot written down, and Uncle Jim has said a lot.
I want to think that might have been Gulledge. Winford Gulledge and his wife opened a restaurant in about your time called Wylene's. Her name is Wylene. This is Keith Gulledge's daddy.
I got you.
And other brothers, but
Now I remember the sweet shop, and I think it was right in where Bottle Tree is. So the Van Dry
I bet you
Goods.
They changed it.
And became the Carrickers. Remember Candy Carricker, Teresa Carricker?
Yes, I do.
They had the sweet shop, and I believe it's right there. I just have this, we're calling it right now. And to the left, John's Jewelry was Carl McClendon's. And
Right. I bought
Grace
the one.
McClendon's, okay.
And that's where he was working. He was working here when I started
Okay.
rabbit hunting with him, and then he moved over. But beside
Well, Don said a fire in that little, there's an optometrist's office right there, and a
Little
fire
office.
started, and that was what prompted them to move over. Yeah.
cool. I'll be darned.
So we've got Ed's that we could talk about, and of course, White Van and Aunt Corinne's shop. So if
You know, mother would help Aunt Coe on Wednesdays to give her a break. And she'd work all week. And mother, I guess this was before she started working for Uncle Jim. She'd work, give Aunt Coe a break, and I'd come
That's
up.
nice.
I'd come up here.
So she just would, from the home, she'd come over here. How does she get here? She walked.
Just walk.
And what was the age difference between Aunt Co and Grandmother Van?
Well,
Who was older?
Grandmother Van was
Okay.
much older, several years older.
Okay.
I think Bob was older than grandmother, and
Sid Eva would have been,
Sadiqa
right? She was the oldest.
Oldest child, I believe.
Okay.
And then Ralph would have been older. But this White and Van was another icon, probably not as big as Ed's, because people from all over would come and eat oysters and hot dogs at Ed's place.
From Dothan and everywhere.
They
Okay.
had the Barrentine family is who Ed married. Dot was a Barrentine. They're the big fish market people in Dothan.
Okay, and they also serve hot dogs. Did
Yes,
before.
they did. Especially in football season, Daddy would say, "Let's go before the game. Let's go get a hot dog and some oysters." We'd eat a dozen oysters, and I'd get a Suncrest orange
Is that right? Okay.
and eat oysters and a hot dog. Here, look in the phone.
Yeah. And tell me a little more about White Van's story. Any memories you have of it?
One thing, doesn't have anything to do with the clothing part, but this is where I got clothes from Buck Vans and from Ezell's. Mother wanted to split the difference. She wanted to give both of her relatives, both of her sisters and brothers, business. So I'd get some clothes here and some at Ezell's in Abbeville. But people would gather here. I'm telling you, the early morning crowd would come in, and once they'd all get in, Wayne Lay, Booster Golden, Charlie Smith.
Could they sit around in there, or were they standing around?
There and talk and pick at each other.
Just standing around inside?
Standing around.
Okay.
He had some seats in the back where they fitted shoes.
I remember
Some
that
of them
little,
would sit
yeah.
back there. Some of them would lean on the counter. They'd be all over that store until it came time to choose numbers for who's going to buy the coffee. Now, this is a gambling operation.
That's
going
so
on.
funny. Okay.
Uncle Bumps usually was the one to get the numbers. Maybe two of them would get the numbers, and then Uncle Bumps would keep them, and they'd guess a number between 1 and 100, and then he would isolate that. If somebody guessed 75 and the number happened to be 80, okay, between 75 and 100, and then he'd point at you, you'd be next in line, and you'd guess 85. And he said between 85 and 75, and that would narrow it down a little lower. Next,
That's
you get
funny.
to choose. And then whoever was left with the last number, or whoever guessed the number had to pay. You had to guess away
and
from the number.
they would go get coffees to go and bring back over. Or all of them would go over to Ed's and they'd pay.
The man that lost would be picking up the check.
That's funny.
It was cool.
That is. Oh yes.
There was all kind of tales told, funny stuff going on. It was the place to be.
Interesting. And who all? I know that Don worked there a little bit, and of course Mike and Bill.
Yep.
Anyone else that you can think of?
I cannot think. I don't think Teddy Wilson ever worked there. He worked for years.
And did Aunt Dot on occasion come up here just to visit and see everyone, or did she stay away? She needed a break.
Yes, exactly. That was the ice plant where they really fixed that building up there.
That was the ice plant in there, okay. And who owned the ice plant?
Wayne Lay did, as long as I can remember.
Okay.
He came in from Hartford.
Okay.
And bought that business, and he was another real gentleman. I mean, he was as nice a guy as you'll ever want to meet.
And I believe there was an ice plant that was next to the Quidden office, that corner building that was John Jolly Espy's, that parking lot where Hardy's Tire, we've talked about the service station in between the bank.
Amazing.
And that was John Jolly's probably smaller ice operation in town.
First I ever heard of it.
Okay.
That's interesting. But behind it, you see where those, I never have understood exactly what those exhaust things are about. Must be the refrigeration. I don't know.
There was something, Mark Willis told me, I can't remember right now, but he knows this.
Well, good. Behind is where they killed animals. They had a black man and a .22 rifle, and they bring hogs in or cows in.
That's how they do it then.
They'd string him up. I guess they had an electric winch to string them up, gut them.
That was a meat processing plant.
A meat processing plant, right?
Were people hunting deer back in that time? There were no deer. You mean those were? How did they end up here?
I think they replanted it.
Okay.
I really do. I don't know where the deer went and why, but you know there were quail all over this country. Uncle Oscar was a big quail hunter.
And Granddad Major was. Okay, what about pheasant? So no pheasant. So quail hunting was popular, and rabbit hunting you mentioned, not as popular.
It was what the poor folks did.
Okay, but quail hunting was okay.
Quail hunting was more of an aristocratic kind of thing, but all the sportsmen liked to do it. Most everybody. Uncle Sam had a bird dog named Mac, and Uncle Oscar had many bird dogs. He was the biggest quail hunter. He'd come down and hunt.
Do people still do that today?
They don't, because the quail have gone. I think when
so there were no deer and there were a lot of quail.
There were turkey and deer over around the river, but I don't know anybody that went over there hunting. Uncle Oscar hunted turkey before they got traveled.
I got you. Interesting. So I see that mural someone just painted along that Misty Salon right there. They just finished that yesterday. And that's Dancing Dave's Peanut. Do you know anything about Dancing Dave?
I do.
Can you tell me an interesting story that
I certainly can.
Okay.
I can tell you one interesting story about Dancing Dave. I saw him and I hauled him around a lot. He'd be going back and forth between Headland and Dothan. He'd go to Slocum. He had a family down there and he had family here. And I think he had some family in Chevy country down there in Kinsey, the big subdivision down there.
Excuse me, guys. You know, nobody's going to believe that's Brother Dave's hair.
No. Anyway, Dave, listen, Dave was a family fixture when he was growing up. He used to look after Maymay when she was a baby.
Really?
You need to ask her.
I will.
I think she'll remember some of that, but Dave remembered it. No question about it. Miss Mary is what he called her.
Okay.
Miss Mary this and Miss Mary that. One day when the porch house was going, Uncle Jim pulled up in front of the porch house. I had probably been in there working. And he pulled up out there, and I was going to go to ride with him, and he kept looking back across to the Espy building over the old thrift store. There was Dancing Dave. It was around Christmas. He said, "Come on, get in the car with me. That's Dave. I need to go see him." He drove right over here to where Dave was standing on the corner at the thrift store. on the very corner, and pulled out his billfold and handed Dave a $20 bill. I couldn't believe it.
He really,
$20.
that was a lot of money back then. So Uncle Jim did this.
Uncle Jim.
Very generous.
Not enough.
What did Dave say? Do you remember his response when he
I think he
reaction?
said, thank you, Mr. Jim.
That's very nice.
Or Dr. Jim. I'm not sure what he called him. I know he called Mary Miss Mary. But listen.
Those are the stories we never need to forget.
Never
right?
forget them. Exactly. He'd come in when I was working at when I was working at Landmark. Every special event, Dave would show up, and he'd never paid. He'd walk down and come through the woods and come into the park
back
and
way.
never paid.
He knew, and no one said anything about it. They just knew.
Jail was right around in the back, and I think the police officer was right there on the as you walk in the door on the right.
And is the jail still here today? Is it still used?
No.
They don't have a new jail?
I wouldn't be surprised. No, I think they may have torn all that out.
I got you.
They may have torn it out when they built. Actually, that's built in the back of the library, I believe. I cannot remember. But yes, I can remember looking in the jail. A lot of people got put in there, and one time, our cousin Martha Jew Blackshear's goat got put in jail because it was out, and the law caught it and put it in the
It's
jail.
better to go there than over to the slaughterhouse.
That's exactly right. This was later than
I
the
got you.
slaughterhouse business, but anyway, the door was open all the way through. There was a water fountain in there, and it had a sign over it called Riggs Creek. That was when Mr. Horace Riggs was the county engineer, and he did a lot of work here in Headland. I guess he may have had an office here, but they named that. He probably complained that they didn't have a water fountain. They put a water fountain in and named it, just playing with
Okay.
it, named it Riggs Creek. There was also a telephone on the wall, an old-timey hand wound.
So, okay.
It didn't work, but I think that was the siren to warn of a fire. And the people around
Tsunami
town,
coming.
people
or
around
hurricane.
town who were volunteer firemen would run over here and get the fire
I
truck.
got you.
Pete Bracken was probably.
Who else was a volunteer fireman back then? Do you remember?
I don't know back then, but when I was in it, both the Hardy boys were David Marr, Daniel, and Nathaniel Vickers.
So Blanche was Bob's wife.
Yep.
As the sun is so bright, yeah.
She was kin to Mr. Fred Reynolds. You know Freddie and Billy Reynolds?
Oh yes, okay. She was around. Okay.
She was their aunt, I believe.
Okay.
But this is where that pool hall was. This is where the pastime pool hall was. We've got a picture of me or Sam showing a calf.
And Dad as well, right here. Yes.
Sure, yes.
So right out here on the road.
Actually, it was more on that side.
Okay.
Whenever we'd show them, we'd do it right out here in the middle of the road. When we'd walk them and they'd have a stop and set them up.
Was it typically done out here, or was it just a one-time sort of thing that was unusual? Okay.
Once or twice sort
Okay.
of thing, and I think it was so disruptive, we ended up doing it in stockyards. We do it
That
at
makes
Headland
sense.
Stockyard one year, Abbeville Stockyard
Okay.
another.
So there were some hog sales many a year back in the 20s, 30s, and so I can understand why in the 50s they were doing livestock shows, but eventually with all the cars and businesses,
Exactly.
it disrupted things.
Most of it was down on that end, and they took the picture from one of those windows up there, or maybe even on top of that building. That's where the picture was taken, which you're talking about.
I got you. Interesting. Up there. What do you recall about this building?
Okay. Well, the only thing I can remember about it was that William Weston, his daughter Jane, was in my class. She was in Bill's and Miles in my class.
Okay.
Her daddy, I don't know if he built it. I really don't know. But
So that was Whedon and Louise Weston?
right,
Okay.
Jane and Louise, William Weston's furniture store. And as long as I can remember, that vacant lot right there has been there. But it's a warehouse, and I think Solomon's on desk is on that building.
And I've seen some photos. There were barbecues. Harvest Day, certainly, that people were set up out here barbecuing chicken and things.
I
Yeah.
believe that's right. Platts rented this building from the Espies and had a grocery store.
Herman Hicks?
Herman Hicks.
Okay.
And Otho Platt, I don't know how they're related, if they are Platts, and these Platts were related to the Greasy Spoon Platts.
Okay.
But as I understand it, it was a grocery store all of my life. I just didn't come here much. I remember Jimmy Hicks working there. When I was working bag boy here, he was a bag
there.
boy over here for his daddy.
Do you recall there being cars on the second floor?
I don't recall it, but
Okay,
I've
you've
been
heard
up there
about
to
it.
see it. Have you been up there?
No.
That's something you need to do. They're renting that building from y'all now.
Okay.
I'm almost sure. I don't believe Espies would be selling that building.
I'm not sure if we have or not. I have to ask.
They had an incline. It was like steps built up there, heavily built, and they had a winch up at the top where you could winch a car up into that, and it was a showroom at one time for what kind of cars, I don't know. I don't think it was Ford, but I don't know.
Mark Willis said it was, and Don did as well. He believed it was connected with A.D. Walden's.
Okay. Also, there's a bunch of chicken coops up there. Back in the 20s and 30s, before that, chickens were a big deal. There wasn't any big chicken houses at that time. People just had yard chickens. And people like my Uncle Richard Brannon made a business out of going around to different yards and buying chickens from people and accumulating them. I think they had these that they would buy and have them for sale. And maybe they were
just live chickens up there.
Live chickens.
Okay.
But Uncle Richard had a place over on the railroad. They would accumulate chickens there. This is off subject. Well,
Okay.
it's similar.
Okay.
And they'd get up enough chickens that they could load up a big 2-ton truck and drive to Miami, Florida to sell them. They could make enough money to drive down there on no paved roads. All the roads.
Interesting. Okay.
My daddy had a chance to go with them. They took out one chicken coop right behind the driver, right behind the cab, and gave him a blanket, and that's where he rode all the way to Miami, Florida on a chicken truck. Bottom line is that the chicken business was a whole lot different then, and everybody still liked to eat chicken.
Oh yes. Any more memories of the square? And
Not that I can remember. We played out here ourselves. I don't remember having any big football games. We'd have our football game on the lot between 102 Forest Street and the corner.
and who would play in that game typically?
They let me play. I was the center for both teams.
So you were one of the these are all cousins, basically cousins and friends.
Brothers and their friends.
Okay.
They'd have this
So
was
the
when I was
Brannons primarily, not the Vans necessarily, but
Brannons mainly and their friends.
Okay.
Whoever were. I can remember Sonny and Bookie Rayleigh. You won't even know them. They ended up in Dothan. Bookie came back and was a coach. He was one of my coaches in high school. Sonny coached at Ashford.
So this was tackle football? Were you playing it back then or
I
not?
think they would just. I think it was like two.
Okay.